Now, what do we know about stimulus packages in the past? Here's what we know. Only two times in our history have we ever had a stimulus package that was effective. 2 times. John Fitzgerald Kennedy created a stimulus package that was effective. And Ronald Reagan in the early 80s created a stimulus package that was effective. All the others have been ineffective to fix what is ailing us. If we do not fix the mortgage problem in this country and housing, this money will be to no avail other than to shackle our children and our grandchildren for years to come. What does that mean when I say shackle? It means stealing their future. Right now, the average American has a 30% higher standard of living than the average European and the average Japanese. What we're about to do and what we've been doing is to guarantee that that 30% advantage in standard of living is going to go away. Other people say, well, you got to fix the finance, you got to fix the credit markets, you got to fix the liquidity markets. You can't fix the credit markets. You can't fix the liquidity problems that we have by spending money. We've already spent $400 billion of the TARP money, and other than pulling us back from the precipice of an absolute collapse of our financial markets, we still have the credit markets tied up and frozen in this country. I want to give you an example. I have a farmer friend that's been banking with a bank for 15 years. He's never missed a payment. He's been 100% on his payments every time. He has assets far in excess of what his loans are. Far in excess, 15, 20 times what his loans are. He was told this last week by his bank that we don't want your business anymore. Now, this guy is a premium credit risk. Why do they not want his business? Because they want the money in the bank rather than to have even a good loan outstanding. Our credit problems aren't getting better, they're getting worse. We have not solved the problem by putting money on the equity side of the balance sheets of the banks. And the reason we haven't solved the problem is because we haven't approached and fixed the real disease, which is the mortgage markets and the mortgages that are underwater and the housing crisis in this country. You know, I want to spend a moment. A lot of the rhetoric we've heard in the last 3 or 4 months in this country goes after markets and capitalism. Market forces and capitalism in this country created the greatest country that has ever been or ever will be. And when we hear market forces and capitalism criticized as the cause for all our problems, we need to do a gut check. Market forces and capitalism didn't cause this problem. Congress caused this problem. By us short-term thinking, by us thinking, how do I look good politically? How do I do something that isn't based on markets? That's what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were really all about. We were actually giving loans to people who really couldn't afford them. It wasn't market capitalism that got us in trouble. It was short-term, politically expedient thinking that got us in trouble. So the next time you hear somebody attacking the very thing that generated liberty, the very thing that generated freedom, the very thing that generated the greatest standard of living in the world, you ought to ask the question, is that true? Did market capitalism get us in this trouble? What got us in this trouble was creating a socialized risk that abandoned the market principles and created a system of loans to people who could not afford the loans. One of the questions I think we ought to ask, or at least the American taxpayer ought to be asking every member of Congress, is what guarantee do you have that passing this $1.12 trillion spending bill is going to solve the problem? And you know what? There's not a guarantee out there. No member of Congress can tell them that. We're going to treat the symptoms with this bill. We're going to solve some of the short-term problems. We're going to create dependency from the states. We're going to outline and do things that we have no business doing. We're going to expand federal bureaucracies. We're going to raise the baseline at $300 billion that'll never go away. That's what we're going to do with this bill. We're going to emphasize and fund the most inefficient bureaucracies in the world, not on the basis of what is the best thing to do, but because we'll look good and we'll help somebody out that needs our help right now. I am not opposed to us helping people that are unemployed. I'm not opposed to giving extra food stamps to people who are fined through no fault of their own in a predicament that they can't change. But that's not what this bill does. What this bill does is take a list of policy options that have been on the table for years and funds them in enormous, extravagant amounts that will have no impact, zero impact in terms of getting us out of a recession, and will have 100% impact in guaranteeing we're going to lower the standard of living in this country and we're going to steal opportunity from our children. Let's look at where we are right now as a nation. We, at the end of this year, will have an $11.6 trillion debt. Probably $11.8 trillion debt. Very close to our total GDP. We have $95 billion in unfunded liabilities that we're going to place on the backs of our children and our grandchildren through Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, and Medicare Part D. Things that we're going to give people that they've really not paid for, or we've stolen the money that was there to pay for them, and we're going to transfer that to our children. You know, last year, we paid, as Americans, $230 billion in interest. You know what it's going to be 2 years from now? It's going to be $450 billion. How many people really think that the interest rates that we're seeing today are going to be stable and the same 5 years from now? All the economists tell us they're not. As the world looks towards us and we continue to borrow, we've increased our debt by $5 trillion by the time you take what the Federal Reserve has done and the Treasury's done. How many people think that we're going to be able to borrow money for 10 years for 2.6%? No economist thinks that. They know it's going to rise 2 or 3%. So we're going to go from about 16% of our budget for interest payments to about 40% of our budget for interest payments. What are we going to do then? The very real important things that we need to do, not the superfluous stuff, the very real important things that the Constitution says we should be doing, what are we going to do then? Are we just going to borrow more? Well, what happens when we borrow more? What happens when we borrow more is interest rates go up, inflation goes up, and we have one of two choices. We can file bankruptcy as a nation, or we can have hyperinflation and a marked devaluation of the value of the dollar. What does that mean? That means that you won't be able to keep up with your payments. You won't be able to buy a home. The cost of any good that's imported in here will rise astronomically. This is Armageddon for us. And we were in this shape. How dare we think that we can spend money that we don't have now on things that we don't need now and get out of a problem that was caused by the very same philosophy? It cannot happen. It will not happen. Let me outline what we've done so far in terms of this, quote, economic downturn. Last April, we borrowed $160 billion from our grandkids. We gave everybody a tax credit under $75,000 a year or $150,000 with family. We didn't pay for a penny of it. We didn't get rid of one wasteful program. We didn't make one hard choice. And what do the economists tell us that we did with that? What was the net effect? The net effect was that 12% of it had an effect. 12%. Now, crank that up to $1.1 trillion at 12%, which is what the estimate is of this bill in terms of what kind of effect it's going to have. We're going to have about $120 billion that's going to have a positive effect. And then we're going to have another $850 or $860 billion that's going to have no effect whatsoever except to steal future from our kids and our grandkids. We're going in exactly the wrong direction. We ought to be standing on the principles that made this country great. There ought to be a review of every program in the federal government that's not effective, that's not efficient, that's wasteful or fraudulent, and we ought to get rid of it right now. We ought to say, gone, to be able to pay for a real stimulus plan that might, in fact, have some impact. I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that next week we're going to hear from the Obama administration wanting another $500 billion. Outside of this, they're going to want another $500 billion to handle the banking system. Still not fixing the real disease, the pneumonia. We're going to treat the fever or treat the cough, but we're not going to treat the real disease. And until we treat the real disease, this is pure waste. It's worse than pure waste. It is morally reprehensible because it steals the future of the next two generations.